What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Before I get started on the video, just want to let everybody know I will be on Bobby and Justin's channel talking Giants for their next podcast. Bobby's sick, and I hope he gets better soon. Justin asked me to pop in tonight. I'm not sure when he's going to upload it, but I know we're filming at 7:30, so really looking forward to that going on their channel. I think they have one of the better Giants channels on YouTube. Two great guys, gotten to meet them twice in person. But in this video, I wanted to talk about something that is frequently, asked to me during my live streams. What's the New York Giants cap situation looking like, and what would you do as a New York Giants fan? And it's something, unfortunately, we have to look at. And right now, the New York Giants are at 4-9. There's not a whole lot to talk about in season, and I still think it's premature to really start to talk about the draft prospects and really get into draft talk, being that we still have a month left in the regular season, and being that we still don't know where the New York Giants ultimately will be picking in the first round of this year's draft. And that's something you also have to consider, by the way, when you go over the cap space and what the New York Giants are going to be able to spend going into the 2022 offseason. How much money has to be allocated to the draft? So that's the first thing I'll talk about. The Giants right now, I think, have 10 picks, where the brunt of that money is going to be spent, regardless if it's 10 or 11 picks, is going to be in the first round. Second round, usually about $1 million or so, particularly being that it's going to be an early second round pick. But the brunt of the money is going to be spent on those two first round picks that the New York Giants currently have. If you go back and look at the 2020 draft, I'm not going to so much look at 2021 due to the fact that the cap went down because of the pandemic. In 2020, I think the fifth pick overall got about $4.5 to $5 million, if I remember correctly, when somebody asked me on stream. So I'll be conservative here and say that on average, those two picks are going to run about $5 million a piece. So about $10 million of your salary cap are going to go just to those two first round picks. The other 8 picks, we'll say, make up about another $3 to $5 million. So if you want to be really conservative, about $15 million in draft expenses in this upcoming draft. Now, one thing that the New York Giants could at least explore if they want to try to alleviate some of the cap expenses is potentially trading down with one of those first round picks. Say you're picking 6, say you're picking 7, and you want to drop to 12 or 13. Because somebody wants to say, come up and get a quarterback, you still feel like you could get a good offensive lineman in the 12-13 range, that definitely will give you a decent amount of cap savings, maybe an extra $2 or $3 million that would go towards that draft pick. But, of course, you're just kicking the can down the road when the salary cap does go up to the following draft, because you would ultimately more than likely be getting another first-round pick in that draft. Now, that draft pick may not be as high as this one is, but regardless, you figure at least at $12 to $15 million are going to be put towards draft expenses this year for the New York Giants. Now, before I get into the 2022 cap, I wanted to look into the future at the 2023. And if the general manager candidates that are going to be coming in are certainly going to be looking at the books and seeing what wiggle room they're going to be able to do with the New York Giants. And I think 2023 is going to be the year, if the New York Giants do this appropriately, where they will have some expenses. Now, what you have to, some freedom rather, to bring in some players. But what you have to also factor in here is there's going to be draft expenses. Like I said, this is not accounting for the draft picks coming in this year and the draft picks coming in 2023. But if you look at the 2023 cap space right now, down at the bottom, it is $91 million currently. Like I said, with the draft expenses, you're probably talking more around $60 million. But then there's going to be players that you could potentially get off the books. Now, granted, right now there's only 30 players that are under the salary cap in 2023, going 2 years into the future. But you look here, Leonard Williams, if he's not performing, would save you $18 million if you were to cut him. The number in the gray is what he would cost. The number in parentheses to the left is what it would cost to cut him. So you would save $18 million in savings right there if you were to cut him. Kenny Golladay, at that point, even though it's a lot to eat, if he's not performing, and if he's performing the way that he is this year, even though it may not necessarily be all his fault, it's probably worth it to cut him to save over $11 million. It would cost $21.4 to keep him, $10.2 to cut him. And then you got Adoree Jackson, same thing. It would save you $12 million. So while these salaries definitely hinders the New York Giants for the 2022 season, I think they're going to have a lot more flexibility than some people may realize in 2023 to be able to bring some players in. But make no mistake about it, with as aggressive as the Giants were this past offseason, they're not going to have much wiggle room to bring in players to try to help compete in 2022 via free agency. They're going to have to hope, if they intend to compete and not rebuild, that the players that they brought in can mature and stay healthy and get better and grow as a football team. Now, of course, we don't know what they're going to do in the offseason. We don't know what their plan's going to be. But the majority of their impact players that they're going to bring in more than likely is going to be via the draft with that early second round pick. And of course, those two very early first-round picks. That's where they're going to get their impact players, and they're going to have to hope that those rookies can make an immediate impact, and the younger players that they've drafted in the 2 previous drafts continue to progress and grow as pros. That's going to be the mindset going into next year, because when you look at the salary cap right now for the New York Giants, and this is excluding draft expenses, and this is with 42 players on the roster, they only have $580,000 in cap space. Now, like we saw this entire offseason, the cap situation is fluid. There's things that the Giants could do to try to free up some money to create some space, whether it be backloading salaries, which I don't want the New York Giants to do really under any circumstance, because I thought they did that a lot this year. Now, it was more understandable this year, being that you were trying to give yourself, and it failed, we all know it, but they were trying to give themselves a good look at Daniel Jones. They did not address the offensive line. We could talk about it for days, but I did think it was more appropriate, being that he was on the 3rd year of his rookie salary, to try to get a little bit aggressive. And the good news is, like I said, it's not really going to kill them down the line. 2022, of course, we're going to be limited in terms of who we can bring in. But here's some of the salaries for the New York Giants in 2022. Right now, they, like I said, at least according to Spot Track, this is an estimation. This is based off a $208.2 million salary cap. They have about $550,000 to spend, and that's with only 42 players on the roster. Tack on the draft expenses, you're adding about $12 to $15 more million. So now you're at negative $12 to $14 million, you'll say. And again, this is an estimation in salary cap. So what are they going to be able to do to get some of that off the books? Well, the first thing I'll say before I even get into the cuts, one option you could have, if you feel that Andrew Thomas is going to be a part of the future, which there's no reason to feel that he won't be. The one thing you're concerned with if you're a new GM coming in, of course, is the injuries. But that is at least an option that you could potentially extend Andrew Thomas, free up, $3 to $4 to $5 million on this year's cap if you went and did that, and you're forward thinking because you're paying this guy, well, the cap is what it is, rather than waiting for that contract to play out. I think we all agree that Andrew Thomas, if he could remain healthy, is going to be a long-term piece for this New York Giants football team. Right now, he goes $8.3 million against the cap, so that's just one idea, some out-of-the-box thinking that the New York Giants could do to maybe free up $4 to $5 million on this year's cap and tying themselves into Andrew Thomas long-term, which could, if he remains healthy, be a really good signing. And because 4 or 5 years down the line, when the salary cap goes up, it may look like a bargain with the extension that he's provided with. But some of the moves that the New York Giants could make from on the roster in terms of cuts. You can't cut Leo. You look at that dead cap, and it's ridiculous. First guy you look at is James Bradberry. If you were to cut Bradberry this year, it would save you a little over $12 million. It's $9.7 million to cut him, $21.8 to keep him. And I think the Giants will have to come to the conclusion, how comfortable do they feel with the other cornerbacks that are currently on this roster? Obviously, you have Adoree Jackson, you have Darnay Holmes, Julian Love could, he could play around the field, obviously. Aaron Robinson, the rookie that you drafted in the 3rd round this year, and of course, you could always draft a cornerback early in next year's draft if you were to move on from Bradberry. But $12 million would be a lot of savings for a team that certainly needs it, and for a player that is now 30 and is probably not going to be in the long-term plans. You're also talking about a GM who really has no ties to the James Bradberry addition. Bradberry is still a solid corner, make no mistake about it, but is he worth 21.8? The other option that the Giants could elect to do, and I think it's a distinct possibility, would be to extend Bradberry, but to make it a more cost-effective salary. Maybe give him an extra 2 years, but instead of $21 million a year, maybe making it $14 or $15 million a year, and the ability to say get at it on the 3rd year with a limited cap hit. So there's going to be options that the Giants could take there, but if they were to just flat out cut him, that would more or less get you back to even. It would save you 12.1. Like I said, you're talking at most probably negative 14, factoring in the draft expenses. Kenny Golladay, you're absolutely not going to be able to cut. Adoree Jackson, you're not going to be able to cut. Blake Martinez is the next interesting name, and I know a lot of people are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, how could you cut Blake? You don't have much talent at that position to begin with. Tate Crowder, who else do you have? Now, you could draft an inside linebacker early in this draft, something I've talked about. I do think it's a big need for this football team, but you don't know the player that Blake's going to be coming off of that injury, and he's only got 1 more year left on that contract, and he's going to cost you $14 million to keep him, only $5.5 to cut him. It would save you a little bit more than $8.5 million if you were to move on from Blake Martinez. Now, is it possible, like I said, with Bradberry, they could work something out with Martinez? Sure. If it knocks down that salary, gives him a little bit more long-term stability coming off the injury, maybe they elect to do that, but I don't see an option of bringing Blake Martinez back on that $14 million salary coming off that injury, knowing all the hits that we're going to take in the salary cap, and knowing that could be one of our biggest cap savings. So we'll see there as well. But that's obviously the next big name that is at least an option for the next GM to move on and cut. Then you look at Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard could save you $4.5 million. Now, when the year started, I said there's no way they're going to cut him, being that they backloaded the salary and it committed another $2 million in terms of the dead cap hit to the 2022 salary cap. But that being said, a new GM is going to be coming in, no ties there. Shepard, again, has suffered an injury, and it could save you $4.5 million if you were to move on. I certainly think that's a possibility. Logan Ryan, you can't cut due to the salary. Like I said, Andrew Thomas is a guy that I would at least explore potentially extending if I believed in him long term. And the most obvious cut on this list is the last name there, and that's Kyle Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph is set to make $7.25 million. I think we could all agree at this point in time that the New York Giants made a massive mistake in signing Rudolph. It was never the best usage of the cap. I understood, I tried anyway, to understand the line of reasoning of bringing him in, hoping rather that it would help in the red zone. But at the end of the day, the offensive line hasn't held up, and we haven't put enough points on the board. And Kyle Rudolph has not really helped at all outside of that big play he had last week. And it would save you $5 million if you were to move on. I would think that is an obvious one for the next GM coming in. So if you were to just cut Rudolph and say Blake Martinez, that gets you over the books already. And then you look at other guys down the list. I mean, Riley Dixon to me is an obvious cut. That saves you $3.2 million. I've talked about drafting a punter in the 7th round to try to free up a lot of money that way, and I think that's something that the New York Giants should at least think about. But Dixon absolutely has to be cut, and it would save you $3.2 million right there for cutting a very overpriced punter. Nick Gates is an option, and I hate to say that because I know everybody loves Nick Gates, rightfully so. We need as much help as we possibly could get on the offensive line, but the guy's had 7 surgeries to his leg. We don't know the player is going to be coming back, and it would save you $2.5 million if you were to move on. He only carries a $500,000 dead cap hit. He cost you $3 million. Now, maybe if they feel he's completely healthy, I would assume they would just bring him back for that $3 million price. But if there's any kind of question, I could see the Giants cutting him and maybe bringing him back on a much cheaper salary. But that's another option there to save you $2.5. Booker to me is an obvious cut. That would save you $2 million. You could easily replace his level of production in the 4th or 5th round of this year's draft, and the Giants have 10 picks. I could certainly see them taking a running back later in the draft this year. Oshane Ximines, I think you move on. That saves you $1 million right there. And then after that, there's minor cuts here and there if you continue to look down the salary. But even if you were to cut all those players, it probably still only saves you $40 to $45 million, and you're not going to do that. You may work on some extensions, like I said, and you got to factor in the draft expenses as well. So as Giants fans, even though a lot of you guys, like every offseason, you want them to go out there and get the next shiny toy, and it was exciting during the offseason, when the Giants did it this year, when they brought in Golladay, they brought in Adoree Jackson, and we were really hoping as fans that it would help catapult this team to being a true contender from within the NFC East. It failed miserably, and when you do that the next year, you can't expect them to go out there and spend. The good news is, I don't think it really is going to kill them down the line in 2023. I'm really interested, though, to see how the next general manager attacks this. The other thing you have to factor in is the Giants have some pending free agents. Maybe they could come back if there's not a lot of market for them in terms of a guy like Will Hernandez or Jabril Peppers coming off the injury. If there's no real suitors out there willing to give him a big contract, maybe they could come back on a 1-year deal, but I don't see it. I think in the end, the new GM will let Peppers walk, he'll let Ingram walk, and he'll let Will Hernandez walk because we don't have the money to do it. And quite frankly, those guys have not lived up to the contracts that they've had. Peppers, obviously, some bad luck there with the injury, but we'll see. Could I see Peppers coming back on a 1-year prove-it deal? Sure. Regardless, even if he were to do that, though, I don't see him being in the long-term plans of this New York Giants football team. But we'll see. I just wanted to go over the salary cap with you guys, though, being that I'm sure a lot of you guys question that. Like, what's the future of this team? What can they do in the offseason? And how bad does it look for the foreseeable future? 2022, we're strapped. After that, I think there's going to be some wiggle room that the new GM could definitely operate with. I don't think the cap situation is, say, quite as bad as it was, say, going into 2019. But for 2022 alone, yeah, the Giants are going to be slim pickings. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.